Start. Okay, Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome, Hoshana Rabbah, for like sort of a last minute, shir. So thank you, everybody. Okay, so I entitled the shir 4 Days, 4 Holidays. Really, the first 3 holidays I'll go over pretty quickly, and those are basically Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, and then we'll get to Simchas Torah. But you notice it's interesting. They're 4 days in a row. We each call them by a different name, even though biblically, there only, of course, are 2 names. There's the holiday of Sukkot for 7 days. Hoshana Rabbah, there's zero indication in the Torah that the last day of Sukkot is any different from any of the other days. We'll get there in a moment. Just one of the 7 days of Sukkot, just like the 6th day of Pesach, let's say. So, but we have, our tradition has turned the 7th day of Sukkot into what we call Hoshana Rabbah. And then, of course, the Torah has the holiday of Shmini Atzeres. We'll have to discuss a little bit the relationship between Shmini Atzeres and Sukkot. And then, of course, we have this absolutely made-up holiday of Simchat Torah. In other words, like made up by the people. Beautiful holiday. It's less than 1,000 years old. I mean, it evolved over time, but obviously it's post-Talmudic. And it's unlike Hanukkah and Purim, which are rabbinic holidays, but that's the rabbis established. Already Purim is in the time of the Bible. There's a biblical book. And Hanukkah, even though it's post-biblical, it was established by the rabbis as a holiday. There was no establishment ever of Simchat Torah as any form of a holiday. And it sort of evolved. There's a whole book. Actually, I have it right here. Coincidentally, this is the classic book, Toldot Chag Simchat Torah. It's about how many? 408, over 500 pages. The history of how Simchat Torah became a holiday. But really, according to the Torah, there's Shmini Atzeres. And Shmini Atzeres outside of Israel is 2 days, so we can't give Simchas Torah. So that's the way you get 4 holidays. 4 days, 4 holidays. So just let me sort of like quickly run through Hoshana Rabbah and Shmini Atzeres, and then I want to spend a few more minutes on Simchat Torah. Okay, so Hoshana Rabbah, like I said, is not mentioned in the Torah. It's not even, the name Hoshana Rabbah is not mentioned in the Mishnah either. In the Mishnah, we have Yom Shvi'i Shel Arava, the 7th day of the Arava. Now, in the temple, there, the source of this holiday of what we call Hoshana Rabbah, it's based on the fact that during the temple time, they would take aravot that were very, very, very high. It had to be on top of the altar in the temple. So the altar in the temple is 10 amot high. So that's approximately 15 feet. So the Mishnah describes the people would go every day and they would take aravot, big willow branches, like 20 feet tall, and they would put them on the side of the altar in the temple, and they would flip them over so it's leaning over on the temple, and they would march around Hakafot. This is the origin of our Hakafot, and there's actually a debate if the Hakafot took place with the Arava or the Lulav. As we know, our practice today is we march with the Lulav and the Etrog. We don't march with the Arafot, and we don't have the custom to place Aravot sort of, on the side. And the Mishnah, and that was done every day. Every day they would encircle the altar once. And on the 7th day, they would go through, do it 7 times. Mishnah doesn't really explain why, what's so special. We know 7's a special number, it's the 7th day. But, and the truth of the matter, this was a contentious practice, like many practices that are not in the Torah. I would say like all practices during the Second Temple period. I'm sure many people are aware, like today, the Jewish people are all kinds of different views, and different people do different things. So many of the Jews claim that the Sadducees most famously, Hoshana Rabbah is not mentioned in Torah. The rabbis made it up. And so there's a debate, perhaps the word arvei nachal, which is what we use, arvei nachal, is the willow. So some say arvei is in plural. That's why we have 2 aravot. We have 3 hadassim and 2 aravot, because it says Arvei Nachal is plural, and Anaf Eitzavot is 3 words. Although you should know that Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion there's 1 Arava and one Hadas, that our lulav should have 1 etrog, 1 lulav, 1 Arava, 1 Hadas. We don't follow that view. We assume Arvei Nachal means a minimum of 2, but some say no, Arvei Nachal means 2, 1 for your lulav, and the other one to put on the altar. But that's not directly mentioned in the Torah, nor is the notion that we have this from anywhere. It's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Many Jews disputed it, and we'll get to how that plays out nowadays. But most likely, just very briefly, most likely Hoshana Rabbah is, we've heard and different people talk about, how Sukkot is the time that we're judged on rain. And it's only because we don't want it to rain on Sukkot, we push off the prayer to rain till Shmini Atzeret. But the real time for rain is on Sukkot, and the Mishnah says, but Sukkot, not on Shmini Atzeret. On Sukkot, we're judged for water. So presumably the 7th day and the Hoshanas marching around is sort of, you want to say it's a prayer for rain. The original rain dance, maybe that's not the right term to use, but in a certain sense, that's really what it is, marching around, and we'll get to that. Also, why they march around, the way they march around. So presumably because the 7th day is Sukkot, it's the last day, so we don't really want to emphasize the rain aspects the first 6 days, but on the last day, it's sort of, this is our last chance. And as we know, tomorrow morning, Hoshana Rabbah, Rabbi Silber alluded to it in a different way. We'll say the Yom Kippur, the extra, Psukei Zimra, we'll say it in the tune of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's what we'll do for Psukei Zimra. To get to the moon, the prayer, it's a very serious day. So the 7th day became probably, that's why Hoshana Rabbah perhaps became, it was our last chance, so to speak, to pray for rain, and rain was the most important thing. By the way, just as an aside, I'm sure many people know that, thank God, today Israel is the world's superpower in rain. In water management. I mean, a few years ago when we were visiting, we went up to one of these, water plants, and to see how Israel, even they don't need rain as much as they once used to need rain. So apparently Israel recycles like 85% of its rain. I don't remember the exact number. It's like a very high number. And I remember they told us the next country in the world that has the best water management, that recycles more rain, is Spain, at about 25%. So Israel's like 3 times more powerful. And I was thinking sort of, what does this mean? In other words, is this the whole purpose of the Torah choosing Israel, and Rabbi Silber mentioned that last night, was God can judge us, can let us know what he feels by if he brings rain or not. If we don't, we're not like Egypt. That's what it says in the Torah. We're not like Egypt. Egypt, there's Nile, there's rain, water all the time. We don't have water all the time. We got to pray for rain. We got to depend on God. So we've defeated God, so to speak. Is that bad? So I think the answer is no. This is like it says in the Torah that Eve was punished, that child labor should be very painful. There's nothing wrong. Today we do methods to make it less painful. Whenever the Torah says something negative, we're not bound to follow it. If the Torah gives us a command, don't do this, we have to follow it. But the Torah makes like a statement that is sort of not a nice statement, we can try to defeat it. But I just find that's an interesting aside. And we know that the Kinneret is very high this year. The last few years, I think it's rained a lot in Israel. But rain was the method of God's showing his displeasure, pleasure of the Jewish people. And Sukkot was the time of rain. And Hoshana Rabbah is the last day of Sukkot. So Hoshana Rabbah, we went around 7 times. And of course, every day on Sukkot, they've had the water libations. Now, it's very interesting. I just want to point out one thing, and then we'll move on to Shmini Atzeret. The Mishnah says that this mitzvah of Aravah, special mitzvah of they would go down and take the 20-foot willow and put it on. Sometimes they did it 6 days, and sometimes they did it for 7 days. In other words, they did it every day on Sukkot, every day once, the last day they 7 times. But some years they only did it 6 of the 7 days. What year was that? That would be most years. In other words, when the only time they did this mitzvah of Aravah on the Mizbeach was when the last day, all 7 days, was when the last day of Sukkot, when Hoshana Rabbah fell on Shabbos. In other words, when normally we wouldn't do Aravah on Shabbos, except Hoshana Rabbah, just like the Mishnah the first half of the Mishnah says the mitzvah of lulav. So we know this year we didn't take lulav on the first day of Shabbos, but according to the Mishnah, you do take lulav. We're not going to get into it now, but it's just an interesting discussion why by shofar, the Mishnah says you don't blow shofar the first day, like this year falls on Shabbos, except in the Beit Din, in the Beit HaMikdash, and then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said in a court of law. But the Mishnah is very clear that when the first day of Sukkot falls on Shabbos, you do take lulav. When Shabbos is in the middle of Sukkot, you only take lulav for 6 days that year. Our practice is we never take it on Shabbos. And Hoshana Rabbah was the opposite. When the last day fell on Shabbat, then you did it all 7 days. But when any other day fell on Shabbat, you didn't do it on Shabbat, the Arava. But the 7th day was so important, just like lulav. The Torah says really the mitzvah is only on the first day. It's only rabbinically we take it the other days. So too our Rav on the 7th day. Now, I think most people probably the answer, of course, when was the last time Hoshana Rabbah fell on Shabbos? So I don't know. It's like probably more recently than we had Yovel. I always ask people, when's the last time we had a Yovel? So Yovel we haven't had in about 2,700 years.
Hillel set the calendar.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no. Hillel set the calendar right. So so probably from the 4th century. Our calendar we have today was set in the 4th century, and not by Hillel, the famous Hillel of Shammai. There was another Hillel who lived 300 years later after the first Hillel. He set the calendar we have today, and he said that Hoshana Rabbah should never be on Shabbos because if Hoshana Rabbah would be on Shabbos, just like we can't blow shofar anymore, like it'll take lulav, we couldn't do the Arava. We couldn't do the mitzvah of Hoshana and for sure you couldn't bang the Arava like this weird minhag we have tomorrow. We bang it on the floor. So we couldn't do all that. So they arranged the calendar so Hoshana Rabbah should never be on Shabbos. Okay, very nice. But they didn't arrange a calendar so Rosh Hashanah will never fall on Shabbos. It falls on Shabbos 30% of the time, or so. So and when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, Sukkot falls on Shabbos. So we miss the Torah obligation to blow shofar and to wait lulav we did not have this year. When we blew shofar on the 2nd day of Rosh Hashanah, that's a rabbinic commandment. According to the Torah, there's no mitzvah. And when we took the lulav on Sunday, it was a rabbinic mitzvah. So what isn't shofar 1,000 times more important than Arava Hoshanas, which is a minhag not mentioned Torah? So the answer is, of course it is. And that's exactly why the rabbis established the calendar that way. Because Hoshana Rabbah was attacked, this mitzvah of Arava and the water libations, many Jews, it's not in the Torah, don't give me this stuff. The rabbis made it up. So the rabbis were afraid if we canceled it one year, people say, it's not so important. You see, we didn't do it last year. People don't know. Last year was Shabbos. That don't give me all the niceties. We don't do it. If it was really important, we would do it every year. So the rabbis were afraid they didn't ever want to skip a year for Hoshana Rabbah because then people, who knows what would happen. Rosh Hashanah, no one's going to say that. We know that. Jews, Adi Yom Hazeh, Jews who never go to shul, it's an amazing, I think it's a beautiful phenomenon. People make fun of it. I think we're losing it, which is sad. The 3-day-a-year Jew is very important. It's a very important part of our community because the alternative is the no-day-a-year Jew and the intermarried Jew. The 3-day-a-year Jew knows they're Jewish. They come at least 3 days a year. But everybody knows. No one's not going to, okay, Rosh Hashanah shofar isn't important. So the rabbis were willing to, it's a fascinating normal. Normally, we're much more lenient in rabbinic law. But in this case, because of the historical fights, the rabbis were willing to give up the mitzvah of shofar on Shabbat. And you can't arrange a calendar that both of them can't. I mean, there are limits to what you can do. They said, we'll allow Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat, we won't allow Hoshana Rabbah. Somebody wanted to ask?
7 and to 9, right?
Question, or somebody just talking out of turn? Okay. Anyways, if you can mute yourself, if you have a question, please feel free to interject. That's fine. Okay. So that's...
Jay.
Yes?
Yeah, just... You mentioned that Sukkot is a time for rain, but I thought in Tanit that the rainy season...
Right, Rabbi Silver spoke about that last week. We don't, okay, this is one of my favorite halachot. I have a few halachot that I love, just expressed as such, whatever, I have halachas I like better than other halachot. So one of my favorite halachot, if you can, I mean, we call it halakha, is the minhag why do we say V'tein Talumatar? We wait till Zayin Cheshvan, at least in Israel. I'm not going to get into December 5th, December 4th, whatever. But the minhag was, we stay Mashiv HaRuach on the, right away on Shmini Atzeret. By the way, Rabbi Eliezer, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer, it's him and Rabbi Shua have a debate. I think it's Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says we should say Mashiv HaRuach even on the first day of Sukkot. Even if we're not going to pray for rain till the 8th day, Mashiv HaRuach is not a prayer for rain. It's an acknowledgement that this is the rainy time. So we should say it. So he says, even today, we should say Mashiv HaRuach on the first day of Sukkot. We don't do that. We wait. So what about V'tein Talumatar? So really, we should say V'tein Talumatar beginning on Shmini Atzeret, or when you daven after Simchas Torah is over. And the Mishnah says we don't do that because we have a mitzvah to come to Yerushalayim 3 times a year. Jews come to the temple to celebrate the holiday of Sukkot. They're there for Shmini Atzeret. And it took, for the people who lived up north, the furthest, like travelers who would come, live 15 days away. They didn't have airplanes, they didn't have cars. I mean, it's an amazing thing. It means 15 days away means they left 15 days before, which is like Rosh Hashanah time. They have to leave 15 days in advance. They have to stay in Yerushalayim for a week. They go 5 weeks. The mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel took them 5 weeks to do. And believe me, I'm sure not every Jew did it, and they did it once every 5 years, whatever. But it took 5 weeks. Nonetheless, there were Jews who came to Jerusalem, and they were going to go back in an open horse and buggy in a carriage. And it's very not nice to pray for rain when people are traveling who came to do a mitzvah. That's what I mean. It's such a beautiful halacha. So really, we should say V'tein, or in Israel, the custom really should be to say Tein Talumatar beginning immediately after Shmini Atzeret. But because we don't want to pray for rain while people who were nice enough to come to Jerusalem are traveling home, we don't say the prayer for rain. Beautiful. We take into account the individual, who came. Okay, so that's just a little bit about Hoshana Rabbah and etc. Okay, Shmini Atzeret. So just very, very briefly, because I do want to focus on Simchas Torah. Shmini Atzeret, really the question is it part of Sukkot or is it a separate holiday from Sukkot? And obviously, if you ask such a question, the answer is it's both, of course. And the Torah describes it as the 8th day. Well, obviously it's the 8th day. It's connected to the holiday of Sukkot. Rabbi Eliezer, I just mentioned, is of the opinion that if you didn't eat in the sukkah on the first night for whatever reason, maybe it was raining, maybe you didn't have a sukkah, who knows what, or whatever, you can make it up on Shmini Atzeret night. In other words, you can fulfill, apparently it's a sort of strange, and the rabbis reject his opinion, but it's quoted in the Mishnah, that you fulfill perhaps the biblical obligation to eat in Sukkot, any night you eat in Sukkot, including Shmini Atzeret. That Shmini Atzeret night, if you miss the first night of Sukkot, because we know there's only a real obligation to eat one night, the first night in the Sukkah. The rest of the week, you don't have to eat in the Sukkah. You just shouldn't eat a meal outside of the Sukkah. But if you want to eat snacks all week, the Seder, eat snacks outside of the Sukkah. But the meal, so the one night can be, the first night can be on Shmini Atzeret. On the other hand, we know that Shmini Atzeret is the Mishnah lists, not the Gemara lists off 6 differences. Peser, Keshev. I don't have time now to get into what they are, but they have its own lottery. We say Shechayanu for Shmini Atzeret. We call it Chag Shmini Atzeret HaChag, different variations. It Rachmana litzlan, it pushes off. So like the first days of Sukkot will push off the Shiva, and then the Shmini Atzeret will push off the Shloshim. So it's a separate holiday. And of course, there's no lulav, there's no sukkah, and there's no nisuach hamayim, the basic mitzvot. What is there on Simchat Torah? So I think I may have mentioned this once before. I don't recall. Maybe on when I spoke on Pesach time. If I did, and you remember, great, and review. And if I didn't, okay. So the mitzvah is Vayita Ach Sameach. That's what you should be. The word ach is a strange word. Ach ba'asor lachodesh. But on the 10th of the month, you should fast, right? Ach is sort of an exclusionary word. That's how it's understood, like but, or, except for. So va'ita ach sameach, you should accept, be happy. It's sort of it's not so simple to translate. But that's where the Torah says on the 8th day, and the Gemara assumes the Torah is referring to the 8th day. It says it by Sukkot, okay? Vayita ach sameach means that the only mitzvah we have on Sukkot is simcha. The only mitzvah we have is joy. Kind of like on Shavuos, there's no mitzvah. There's no mitzvot on Shavuot. In the Torah, there are agricultural mitzvot, but we don't have any mitzvot. Eating cheesecake doesn't really cut it. But and that's a strange minhag anyways, whatever. So there is no mitzvah on Shmini Atzeret. Of course, there is on Sukkot. There are many mitzvot, and of course on Pesach there is, on Rosh Hashanah there is, on Hanukkah, Purim. Every holiday has some identifying mark. But what do you do on Shmini Atzeret? You don't do anything. Like there's nothing. There's no mitzvah except for simcha. Now, I spoke last week how Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu. It's Chag HaAsif, which I sort of put an additional understanding, the gathering holiday, the one that gathers in all the other holidays, the last of the holidays, the culmination of the holidays, and therefore it's a time of our greatest joy. In other words, we build up to Sukkot, and Sukkot is the gathering in, and it's the time of Simcha, of Zman Simchatenu. So Shmini Atzeret is above that. Shmini Atzeret is the Chag HaAsif of Sukkot. Shmini Atzeret is the Simcha of Sukkot, squared. The only mitzvah is Simcha. Now, what do I mean by that? So this is what I think you may have heard before. They're basically, and Rav Soloveitchik has this, there are basically 3 ways plus 1, how to fulfill the mitzvah of Simcha. By the way, just in general, Rabbi Soloveitchik has an essay, in Ala Tshuva. How can the Torah command an emotion, right? Torah says you have to love somebody. You have to love you have to love a stranger. You have to love your neighbor. You have to love. You don't have to love your parents. We said that's for another topic. You have to honor your parents. You don't have to love them. I mean, you should love them, but there's no mitzvah to love your parents. You have to love the stranger. You have to love God, and you have to love your fellow man. How can the Torah? You can't be jealous. And what do you mean can't be jealous? How can I help it? So emotions. So without getting into this, Rav Soloveitchik said that basically the mitzvah to be happy you have to feel happy. But the Torah never likes to just allow us to have an emotion, because emotions run wild and they're incontrollable, and it's all in my heart. I'm a good Jew in my heart. Well, your heart has to express itself in some way. So we do mitzvot to bring out simcha, but the true mitzvah is really to be happy. That's what the mitzvah is. But the rabbi said, here's the thing you got to do. And even if you don't want to do them, like even if they don't necessarily make you happy, presumably, you still have to do them. These are the objective factors that make normal people happy, and therefore you have to do it. But of course, the mitzvah is to be happy. If you're happy, but that's hard. So at least there's a subjective component, which is hard to control, but ideally, and people with practice, I'm sure psychologists will tell you can work on your emotions, you can control them a little bit, etc. That's mitzvah. So what are the elements of simcha? So one is eating and drinking wine. We know that in simcha basar b'yayin, drinking wine, eating a nice meal. And then you have the mitzvah of learning Torah, pikudei Hashem yisharim misamchei leiv. The words of Torah make us happy, and intellectual achievement. You can't learn Torah on Tishrei B'Av, a mourner can't learn Torah. And then there's the mitzvah of sharing with others. V'samach da'ata, halevi, hager, hayatom. You always have to give joy with sharing with others, and talk to people. People who write $1 million check, they always feel good about yourself. You write $1,000 check, whatever, you do something good. When you share with others, you usually feel quite good about yourself. So those are the 3 basic components of simcha, and that's the physical aspects on Pesach. Pesach is a holiday of physical freedom, and matzah and eating and food and chametz, it's all about the physicality of life. Shavuot is all about the spiritual side of life, intellectual achievement. The simcha of Shavuot is that notion. Of course, the laws apply in all of them, but conceptually, and Sukkot is the time of sharing. The Sukkah is meant for everybody, and we even share with the whole world, the 70 sacrifices and the 4 meaning. Sukkot is a holiday of sharing. So these are, it's sort of, again, a culmination. Obviously, the intellectual, spiritual is on a higher level than the physical, and sharing with others is more important, developing your own spiritual side. It's more important to help others than to just, the intellectual achievements, even in the Torah world. So those are the 3 basic mitzvot. That's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. What's the fourth? What's the highest level? Usmachtem lifnei Hashem, to rejoice in the presence of God. I mean, to feel the presence of God. That's hard to do. So that's Yom Kippur a little bit, right? And Sukkot, but it's really the way I'm developing the theme. It's Shmini Atzeret. That's all you have. You don't have the other mitzvot that you have. The mitzvah on Shmini Atzeret is just to feel the closeness of God. And if you just feel the closeness of God, the intimacy with God, not only don't you need mitzvot in a certain sense get in the way. In other words, you're having a special relationship. You don't have to bring in the props. You don't need a fancy meal. Like whatever. When you don't need all that. So Shmini Atzeret represents, in a sense, the highest level, which would explain why Simchat Torah becomes connected to Shmini Atzeret, and that's we'll spend the second half of this year talking on Simchat Torah. So of course, I mentioned in the beginning, we all know Simchat Torah is a made-up holiday, and as Rabbi Silver mentioned last night, and I totally agree. I assume at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody from Israel online. But when I'm in Israel, the few times I've been in Israel, Shmini Atzeret, it's a weird holiday. What can you say? To go from Yisker to Hakapas and Chatan Torah it's like totally weird, and it's weird only just how I feel like why is it weird? Because Simchat Torah would never have happened, I don't think, if we all were living in Israel. See, there's nothing going on Shmini Atzeret. In other words, there's no Seder, there's no sitting in the sukkah, we don't stay up all night learning, even if you want to attach something to Shavuot even. There's just Simcha, okay, one day, fine. But what am I going to do on the second day? Another day of this? So that's when, Simchat Torah developed. Now, of course, in the Torah, the fact that Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are so different is just weird. Again, it's the second day of Yontif. We don't distinguish between the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. The moods are the same, and the 2 days of Pesach, the moods are the same. 2 days of Shavuot. But somehow with this holiday, this is like the way the people developed it, is that we made the second day into a very different day. And like Rabbi Silver alluded to, for those who were there last night, so Shmini Atzeret becomes the serious day. It's the day we have Geshem and Yisker, and the tunes, so almost like Ne'ilah, as he pointed out, it's a very serious day, and etc. And Simchas Torah is the exact opposite. I would say, if I want to continue the theme I'm developing, that Shmini Atzeret, we worship God out of fear, and Simchat Torah, we worship God out of love. There's, or what we call it, the Rambam says, tshuva me'ahava and tshuva me'ira. You can repent because you're afraid either God will punish you or something, you're doing something wrong. You can repent because of love. You want to do something. And obviously, tshuva me'ahava is much greater. Or so to worship God out of love, there is a mitzvah in the Torah to love God, I just mentioned, and there's a mitzvah to be in awe, fear. However you translate year, fear, awe. Year is probably more fear. Awe. Pachad is fear. But whatever, there's a little bit of fear of God. And of course, we know Ava is greater. That's, I always like to quote, the Ramban has a beautiful idea. We know that the Torah tells us if a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah come in conflict, like the only pair of tzitzis you have is shatnes. That's like one of the classic examples. You have a four-cornered garment of linen, and you have to put on wool tzitzis, but you can't wear wool and linen, but you can't have the garment without tzitzis. So today, I'm sure the rabbis would say, don't wear it, wear a different piece of clothing, but that's not how the Talmud assumes. The Talmud says, wear it, because the mitzvah aseh of tzitzit overrides the negative commandment of shatnes. When they come in, if you have no other choice, whatever, that's your clothes. Why? Because mitzvah aseh, positive mitzvot reflect love, and negative mitzvot reflect fear. I don't do something because you're my boss. I can't go against you. When I do something for you, that expresses love, and love is greater than fear. So mitzvot aseh, the mitzvot of love, are on a higher level than the mitzvot lo taseh of fear. So that's perhaps Shmini Atzeret, and Simchat Torah. Now, Simchat Torah, like we all know, is man-made. It's not mentioned in the Torah. It's not mentioned in the Talmud. It's in this book that I showed you before on Toldot Simchat Torah. Where did I put it? This book, The History of Simchat Torah. So in the first chapter, he discusses, forget that maybe in the 10th century, I don't remember now exactly, that in Egypt, there were two shuls, down the street from each other, the shul I daven and the shul I don't daven in. And one of them used to do, they used to finish the Torah every 3 years. They didn't have Simchas Torah. When you finished the Torah every 3 years, there was no Simchas Torah, or maybe every 3 years they did something. But, and the other shul, they had the minhag to finish every 1 year. That's the custom that's being accepted. But thank God, the people from the shul, that's why he opens up the book, the people from the shul, and that you'll only would finish the Torah every 3.5 years. So they're in Vayikra, they're reading Mitzorah, they're reading Parshat Tazria Mitzorah, and the shul down the street, they're partying and Kiddush and Simchas Torah and having fun, but they would join them on Simchas Torah. We're not celebrating, but they're celebrating. They would join them. So it's very interesting. It took a long time. And we know the old practice in Israel was to finish every 3.5 years. It was actually a little bit more than 3 years, closer to 3.5 years it took to finish the entire Torah, as opposed to our practice of finishing in 1 year. So maybe this is very too homiletic, but man-made is something, is an even greater expression of our relationship with God. In other words, they're the mitzvot of the Torah. And in fact, it's just based on a pasuk in Shir HaShirim. The Talmud says that God loves sometimes the rabbinic mitzvot more than the biblical mitzvot, because the biblical mitzvot, God said to do it. I don't have a choice. What can I do? The rabbi said, that shows love, that they're adding extra mitzvot. I mean, within the parameters of when you can add. So sometimes what man does, we all understand this, is of greater significance. When I sort of volunteer, it's of greater significance than what the Torah obligates me to do. And that's what Simchat Torah is. It's our expression of greater love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I would say that's the reading of Simchat Torah. What do we read? Well, we'll start with the second reading, which is the beginning of the Torah, Bereshit. Why do we read Parshat Bereshit? Why is creation there? Not to tell us the story of creation. I've said many times, right? The Torah does a lousy job from a scientific point of view. Torah does a lousy job. For me personally, the questions of Torah and science I don't want to say they're of no interest to me. It doesn't the questions don't bother me at all, because it's two different realms. They have nothing of God. There cannot be conflicts between Torah and science. Then only an atheist can believe that. A person who believes in God cannot believe there's a conflict of Torah and science. Why not? Because if God created the world, that's what you believe, if you believe in God. And if you believe God created the world, then he put in the rules of physics and chemistry and biology. So if you believe God created the world, that means God made science and God made Torah. So they have to work together. As the Rambam said, sometimes we don't know. They're apparent conflict. We don't understand science 100%, and we don't understand Torah 100%. So we have issues. Torah is not interested in telling us science. That's for next week's shir or whatever on Bereshit. But the Torah is interested in telling us that man is unique and man is created in the image of God. And what does that mean? It means we partner with God, that we imitate God. That's always Rav Soloveitchik said, that's the key mitzvah of the Torah, to imitate God. So in a sense, that's what we do on Simchas Torah. Like God gave a Shmini Atzeret, and we give him back Simchas Torah, so to speak. That's not obviously, but I think have this idea there. In other words, Torah is lo b'shamayim, right? Man is sort of is dictating what's happening. But that's so it makes sense that Simchat Torah is Simchat Torah. It's the combination of all holidays. Sukkot is man Simchatenu. Shmini Atzeret's even more. It's only Simcha, and then we have an extra day. So that day we're moving from worshiping God sort of with a seriousness or yirah to ahava. Now, avat doesn't mean total levity. It does not mean you can get drunk and do, all kinds of things, whatever. But it should be done with the way we do it, with a totally different mood. I would say, basically, what Simchat Torah is the expression of Yom Kippur. What I mean by that, we discussed 2 weeks ago, how the Torah was really given on Yom Kippur. The Torah that we have was given on Yom Kippur. Because the Torah that was given on Shavuot was broken on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. The Jews danced around the golden calf, and God was going to wipe us out, and Moshe pleaded, and God forgave us on Yom Kippur. That's when we got our Torah. We don't have to have Torah. The idea of celebrating like Shavuot is Matan Torah only happened after the exile from Israel, because there was nothing left to celebrate. So the rabbis recreated the original giving of Torah. But in the Torah itself, Torah never mentions when we got Torah. It was of no interest. There was no holiday. So when we got the Torah, Har Sinai has no holiness to it. The Beit HaMikdash still has holiness to it. But where we got the Torah is every day, all the time. The Torah had no interest in having a holiday to celebrate it. But once we were exiled from the land and Shavuot lost its meaning, so that was a brilliant move of the rabbis to turn Shavuot, to give it meaning, make it Zman Matan Torah. So that was the day we celebrate Torah, but it's not really the day. Really the day is on Yom Kippur, because that's the day that God forgave us. That's what it says in the Mishnah, Yom Kippur, and we have the happiest day of the year. So that's the day God forgave us, and he reestablished the covenant. But, we're fasting on Yom Kippur. It's not like party mood, it's not the mood. So the party mood, the celebration, we spoke about that. When you get the Torah, you have to eat and be happy. We spoke, that's the 9th of Tishrei Ben Nisan. We added on Simchat Torah. We got the Torah on Yom Kippur, and we're celebrating on Simchat Torah. Now that's really based on rabbinic midrashim that say Sukkot as our response to Yom Kippur. Again, Yom Kippur is worshiping God miyira, and Sukkot is man simchatenu, worshiping God mi'ava. And the reason Sukkot follows Yom Kippur, right? It's not just Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. It's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And Sukkot is our expression of joy and happiness after the intense days of Yom Kippur, of the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, Elul, that hopefully God has heard our prayers. So we celebrate Yom Kippur on Sukkot, and we celebrate Sukkot on Simchas Torah. It's really the combination. What I mentioned last week, Purim. On another level, Purim becomes the culmination of the holidays, man's initiative, right? Purim is from Pesach in the calendar year. Purim is the last holidays. If you add in the rabbinic holidays, Pesach, we mentioned last week, is all about God. Moshe's name isn't mentioned. Purim is all about man. So what man does, in a sense, is greater than what God does. So in other words, Purim, Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur is like Purim. So in a sense, Simchat Torah becomes like the culmination of all our holidays. Sukkot is a culmination, and Simchas Torah is the culmination. I would say like if Pesach, it's like the encore. We celebrated, for 7 days, 8 days. Now encore, one more day. And that's how the Medrash says. One more day, no reason. God, it's hard for you to leave. Let's celebrate all together. So it's not like stam by coincidence. It's not that we finished the Torah. It happens to be, the way the Torah is set up, we finish it now, so we make a party on Simchat Torah. Finish. No. The reason we finish the Torah on Simchat Torah is because it follows on Yom Kippur, is because it's the last day of Sukkot. That's why the yearly cycle was set up. It's not that just so happens that the yearly cycle works. No, the yearly cycle is like this. Of course, the original, it wasn't like that. It was a 3.5-year cycle. But I'm saying the Simchat Torah comes from the people. That's even greater. That's man partnering with God. That's expressing our Tselem Elohim and taking Simcha to a new level. Now, a couple other things. Just it's a little strange, and I think it is connected. We party on Simchat Torah, in theory. Hopefully, please God, at least next year we should all be well and be able to to party extra next year. We have to party less this year. On Simchat Torah, we party, and what do? We read about Moshe dying. Hey, 1,000 times. Like we read Moshe dies. I mean, I know that part we only read once, but Bezorah Bracha is said because he's going to die. And we know that's the rabbis say before you die. That was Yaakov Avinu's prayer to God. That until Yaakov Avinu, nobody got sick, or the Torah doesn't record anybody ever getting sick. And the Medrash says Yaakov prayed that he should get sick. Everyone Torah, they just died. They dropped dead. So Yaakov said, you know what, God, do me a favor, make me sick before I die, so I can prepare for death, so I can call in, because Yitzchak, right, he says to Esav, go get me some food. I want to bless you because I'm going to die soon. He died 60 years later. Like, when he was going to die soon. He had no idea when he was going to die. People didn't know when they were going to die. So Yaakov prayed that we should have warning for our death. That's, again, a whole we can think about that for another time. And that's how the Medrash understands it. Yaakov prayed, and therefore it allows him to bless his children on his deathbed. And that's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing in the Zohar Bracha. So 1,000 times we read over, Moshe's dying, and we're partying and kiddush, and there we go. And we bring all the kids up. Well, what's going on here? It's not nice. It's not nice. Okay, you can say it's a silly question. Maybe it's a silly question, but I think there is something to it. And I think what is to it is this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu, basically we're saying is we don't need Moshe for our Torah. In other words, Moshe gave us the Torah, but what happens in many revolutionary movements or many things, when the leader dies, the movement dies. Moshe was very afraid what was going to happen. You see that in the environment. He's very nervous. The Jews aren't going to follow the Torah, and he was right to a certain extent. But the bottom line is we're here 4,000 years later, and we keep the Torah, and the idea that we could exist without Moshe, that was Cheder Egel. Cheder Egel is the Jewish people couldn't exist without Moshe. That's Yom Kippur. The Jewish people, why did they build the golden calf? What happened to Moshe? We can't exist without Moshe. That's Yom Kippur. Comes Simchat Torah. The Jewish people can exist without Moshe. Moshe's going to die. It's okay. Everybody has to die. 120, he lived to 120. He was healthy to the last. He had the best of both worlds. He was given warning he was going to die, and he was healthy till he died. That's an amazing. That's like not possible for normal people. But that's Moshe Rabbeinu. So in a sense, Moshe Rabbeinu's death on Simchat Torah is, I don't want to say to celebrate, that's like not a nice thing to do, but that's exactly what's going on. It's the maturation of the Jewish people from the Cheder Egel that caused us to lead to Simchat Torah, to Yom Kippur, is the Jewish people can do it on our own, man-made. We're going to survive without Moshe. So that's why we can read B'Zohar HaBracha and celebrate and dance, even if we're talking about the death of Moshe, because Moshe is the ideal. Everybody, that's, we live on. There's another idea, why probably we read it, just tying into what we started this year with about water on Sukkot, is Moshe's birth and death are connected to water, of course. Moshe, how does he survive? They place him in the Nile. I assume it's in the Nile. They placed him in the Yam, and Miriam's watching from afar, and they put him in a basket in the water, and that's how he lives. But Paro finds him, and why does he die? Because he hits whatever he did wrong there. He did something with the rock to get water. So it's also an interesting idea that Moshe, this is unrelated to what I was just saying, before Moshe's birth and death are wrapped up in water, which of course is the theme of Sukkot and Tfilat Geshem on Shmini Atzeret. Okay, now I just want to talk for a few minutes on Hakafot. We began this year, right? The Hakafot started with the Arava. They put the Arava around the altar, and they walked around either with Aravah, they're with the Lulav and Etrog, and they walked around the Mizbeach, and of course, that's why we do it. Our shul is like a miniature temple. So the same way they walked around the altar, so to speak, we walk around on the Bima. And then we do something really weird. On Simchas Torah, we walk around the Bima. But what's the difference between Hakafot on Sukkot and on Simchat Torah? By the way, Hakafot on Simchat, obviously, if the whole holiday of Simchat Torah is made up, Hakafot is made up also. Obviously, they made up that you do Hakafot on Simchat Torah. And that's why there's a 500-page book here to trace the history, because things didn't happen overnight. Our custom, there was Simchat Torah without Hakafot. We celebrated, they had different ways to celebrate, but the way our custom is, we do it. So what's the difference is that on Sukkot, so in the temple, we say the temple is the altar, that's the center. We go around and we take, and the chazan or somebody else stands in the middle holding a Sefer Torah. So what do? We march around in a circle because the Sefer Torah is the center of our life. What's most important, put it in the middle, right? When three people walk, right, the most important is on the middle, and the sides, walk on either side. So we march around in a circle to demonstrate that the basis of our life is Torah. What do we do on Simchat Torah? What do we put in the middle on Simchat Torah? Like I write on Sukkot, there's a guy stands in the middle holding a Sefer Torah, right? Well, who's standing in the middle on Simchat Torah? Anybody? Nobody, nothing. There's nothing there, right? You just walk around the empty bima. So Rav Soloveitchik said, what are you talking about? No. We walk around God. God's there. Simchat Torah is the time we get closest to God, right? It's the heights of Simchatenu, the combination. What do you mean God's there? In other words, God is in the center. Simchat Torah is, wow, now we're on a level only Simcha. I'm not just Simcha to fear. It's this joyous, Yom Kippur, and we've matured as a people, and we know on our own how to worship God, and we don't even need Moshe Rabbeinu anymore. We just have Torah, and we're gonna express our love to God. So we put God in the middle, and we walk around God. Okay, very, very nice. God's there all the time. God's there on the first days of Sukkot. I mean, right? If you believe God is everywhere, so He's there on the first days of Sukkot too. So Rav Soloveitchik, I don't know if the Reb fully explained this or whatever, but to me, it's such a powerful and important idea. Yes, the Torah is our center of life, but not really. The center of our life is God. And a person can observe Torah, and he can be like a firm atheist. You can observe the whole Torah and not have any relationship to God. You don't even have to believe in God by habit. Lots of people, in other words, the goal of the Torah is to get closer to God. The goal is not to keep the Torah. The goal is to get close to God. The way to get close to God is through the Torah. And sometimes, yes, that's what I said before. We can't let our emotions run wild. So I say, well, I'll get closer to God if I don't keep kosher or whatever, do something else. I'll get closer to God if I can drive my car to shul. So I hear the argument that there's a certain logic to it, but that's not how our traditional halakhic system works. You have to follow within the halakha, but the goal is not to keep the idea of Shabbat. The goal is through Shabbat to get closer to God. To recognize that God is the creator of the world, God is the master of the world, God causes the rain, right? We started, right? Even if we can do rain on our own today, whatever, right? That's the idea. So Simchat Torah teaches us it's a higher and harder level. It's not enough to march with the Torah in the middle. We have to take the Torah on the outside and have God in the middle. And the same way you can have people, we all do this. I don't know, I'm guilty. We go through the motions of the mitzvot. We follow, quote unquote, the Torah, but we don't have any passion for it. We don't feel the closeness unto God. So that's what Simchat Torah is all about. We're supposed to feel that the goal of the Torah is to bring us closer to God. So you have people who are observant and not religious, and you have people who are religious and not observant. You have that. You have many fine non-observant Jews who are deeply religious. They have a different view. They were brought up differently, whatever. They see their religiosity not expressed through halakha. There's so for another discussion, but that's not, again, not to be made. Rav Lichtenstein spoke about that, on various occasions. But that's what Simchat. That's why we march on Simchat Torah. We take the Torah now to the outside from the center. We put it on the side. It reminds me of the Rambam's famous notion. The Rambam discusses in his introduction to Pirkei Avot, I think, the 6th chapter, I think that's where he discusses it. The Rambam makes a classic distinction between mitzvot that, quote unquote, to put it in our vernacular, mitzvot that makes sense, and mitzvot that we do only because God says so. In other words, not to steal and to honor your parents, we don't need a Torah for that, right? I mean, Rav Sajak on, so we figure that out on our own, hopefully. Normal people can figure that out on their own. But there's no reason to keep kosher if God wouldn't have told us. And the Rambam famously says, you shouldn't say, ugh, pork, disgusting, how can you eat that? Ooh. The Rambam says, no, you're supposed to say, I want to eat pork, it's delicious. Lobster is delicious. That's what everybody tells me who's eating it. Lobster is delicious. But what can I do? The Torah said, that's a higher level. If you think lobster is lousy, so what's the big deal? You don't eat it. But you have to want to eat lobster. That's how the Rambam says. That's a higher level. The Jew who, I shouldn't say, I want to kill you. I want to cheat on my taxes. I'm not going to cheat because God says not to. Okay, that's better than cheating on your taxes. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. When it comes to ethics, you should want to do the ethics. It's interesting which mitzvot. Some mitzvot are not clear, like when we daven, right? We don't daven because we have to daven. You should want to daven, right? Most of us, that's hard because 3 times a day is boring. But God make us healthy. Oh no, I don't want to ask for health. I don't want to ask for health. I only do it because you make me do it. Doesn't make any sense. We should want to daven, right? it's hard sometimes. Okay, no, so that's the Rambam makes that distinction in mitzvot. The mitzvot we should want to do because they're right in and of themselves. So there's no reason to had God not come out to keep kosher. You're not an unethical person. You can be the finest person. You can eat ham and pork on Yom Kippur and be a wonderful person. You're just not an observant Jew, but it doesn't mean you're not a fine ethical person. So, but you see from this Rambam that the goal is not to keep the Torah. The goal is to be an ethical person. In other words, the height is to be an ethical person. The Torah is the methodology that we believe is the best way to get you there, and it doesn't always work. You can misuse Torah, and as we see what's going on nowadays, people take Torah and they, I don't know. I mean, it's harsh to say, but pervert it, and distort it, and say and use it for all kinds of other things. So that's what Simchat Torah is all about: is getting close to God, and the highest level of Simchat Torah. Right, to feel the presence of God, as we say, moving from physical to intellectual to sharing to the closest to God out of awe, but higher, closest to God out of love, and that's what we do on Simchat Torah. Okay, so that's so Simchat Torah is really just the counterbalance to Yom Kippur. One other thing I'll say on walking around with Hakafot, and this Rav Soloveitchik has an essay, and I was just rereading it today in this book. This, as I said, the second book that introduced me to the thought of Rabbi Soloveitchik, Man of Faith in the Modern World, Rabbi Avram Best, and these were short, snippets, reconstructions of some of his talks, a few pages, talks Hakafot, moving in circles. So in that article, the Rav, he mentions this idea, where God's in the middle, right? That's the goal of Simchat Torah. And then he talks about a circle, right? And most of our sukkot are square, right? We sit in a square circle, but we do hakafot in a square circle. We sit in a square in the sukkah, then we go in a circle. By the way, for those of you who've learned, Sukkah, Masechet Sukkah, there's the famous pages there, Daf Chet, I think Zayin Chet, where the Gemara discusses, like, what's the minimum size of a sukkah is 7 by 7 handbreadths. So is that an area? And then the Gemara gets a whole discussion. What if your sukkah is a circle? Does it have to be like you could put the square in the middle, or you just put the circle in the middle so you miss the corners? And then the Gemara has a whole discussion there of pi, and the Gemara assumes pi is 3. It's a whole, Rashi says pi is 3 and a little bit, they weren't so concerned. That's a fascinating discussion there, and there are pictures in the Talmud, and then use some of the math is very hard to figure out. But anyways, so, but we sit in a square sukkah, most people, or whatever, rectangular, so that's irrelevant, but it is relevant that we go in, sorry, in the way Rav Soloveitchik defines it, it shouldn't be an oval, it should be a circle. Because why do we go in a circle? Because in a circle, everybody is equidistant from the center. Every Jew can approach God, whether you're the Vilna Gaon or Michotei Beitzecha ad Shoei Meimecha. From the woodcutter, that's what the Torah says. Atem nitzavim hayom kolchem. You're all here. And the Torah scholar, great. The Torah scholar, nothing, no greater connection. Every Jew is equal. Every Jew has their own task. Everybody does what they can do. Everybody should live up to their potential, whatever the area is. But we mark in a circle because in a circle, the radius is the same at every single point in the circle. That's A. And of course, the second point, the Rav points out, in the circle is no beginning and no end. You come back. It's Tshuva, again, another time to Yom Kippur, right? Tshuva is to return to where we went before. If you go in a straight line, march in a straight line, you get further and further from where you started. That's why I wrote an article, whatever, now's not the time, but why baseball is the Jewish sport. All the Rosh Yeshivas, rabbis from the previous generation were all baseball fans. Football is like a Goyish sport. Baseball is a Jewish sport. And one of the reasons I can say there, the most popular article probably ever wrote was on baseball. I got more comments. I wrote too, and then on Sandy Koufax and the World Series and whatever. But part of the relation between baseball and Torah is coming back home, right? You score by coming back to base. There are 10 people on the field. There's foul fair, minakamakom, field. There are like 1,000 umpires, the posting. There's a lot of connections. You don't like it, right? If you're not a baseball fan, whatever, anyways, what can I tell you? But so that's a little bit walking around in circles on Sukkot. That's what we do. So just let me wrap up for 2 minutes, just review a little bit, try to put it all together, and then I have a minute left. Either I'll take questions or I'll add one extra point. We basically talked about Hoshana Rabbah is not made up but it doesn't appear in the Torah. It's a rabbinic holiday, the 7th day of Arava. Appears in the Mishnah, was a matter of dispute, and therefore, because it was dispute, the rabbis insisted on keeping it every year today as to remember, and therefore our calendar is set up so Hoshana Rabbah never falls on a Shabbat. It's most likely connected that it's the last day of Sukkot. Hoshana's word to our prayer for rain was, like I say, our beginning of the rain dance. So Hoshana Rabbah becomes that because we don't really want the rain till Shmini Atzeret, but the time we're just for rain is on Sukkot, not on Shmini Atzeret. And Hoshana Rabbah then also takes on this Yom Kippur feel. Shmini Atzeret, we said, is part of Sukkot and separate from Sukkot. It's both, because it's the culmination of Sukkot, where we do away with all the mitzvot of Sukkot, and we have only the mitzvah of Ita Ach Sameach. And then we discussed a little bit the different levels of Simcha, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, physical, spiritual sharing. And then on Shmini Atzeret, it's the connection to God. That's the highest level of Simcha, to feel the presence. And then I'm adding on, this is that on Shmini Atzeret is sort of the relationship to God from yira, from fear or awe, and it's yisker and seriousness, and this. And Torah is a relationship to God through ahava, and ahava, of course, is greater than yira, and that's why mitzvot aseh are more important than mitzvot lo taseh. We talked about human initiative. When we do it on our own, it's great. That's what God did. He partnered with man. He made us to be like God, at Tselem Elohim, and he told us, you do things man does, is in many ways on a higher level, right? Torah lo b'shamayim, we defeat man, and therefore we don't need even Moshe Rabbeinu. We can even celebrate as Moshe Rabbeinu is no longer alive, because the Torah is eternal. It's not dependent on any one person. And we discussed Moshe, so it's tied up to the theme of water. And then we discussed the meaning of the hakafot, marching around. It's true the Torah is our center of life, but not really. Really, the center of our life is God, and the Torah is a mechanism. And that's the idea we express on Simchat Torah. When we take the Torah from the inside of the circle, we move it to the outside of the circle, and we have quote unquote nothing representing everything, God, in the middle, and the imagery of the circle as a equality and coming back to our original point. So any questions? I'm happy. Okay, I see there are 1 or 2 questions sent to me. Just let me take a quick look, and if anybody wants to unmute themselves, they can. So if Shmini Atzeret is a simcha of simchas, then how's the recitation of Yisker? Oh, very good question. So I say Yisker. So I said already, right, Simchat Torah, so Shmini Atzeret became, we worship God through awe, just like Yom Kippur is the happy day, the happiest day, but it's not the happiness the way we think of happiness, right? The honest truth is, it's a very difficult custom to say Yisker and Shmini Atzeret. I think I mentioned this last week. The original Yisker minhag is only on Yom Kippur. It got extended, and the reason we say Yisker on these days is because it's Yom Hadin. It's because it's a day of judgment, and it's to entice, even though we said it's really on Sukkot, not on Shmini Atzeret, but we don't want to say Yisker on Sukkot. You'll notice, by the way, we always say Yisker on the Yontif Sheni Shel Galiyot, when it's not really Yom Tov, except Yom Kippur. Well, not on Shmini Atzeret because we flip it, but okay, but we say it in the 8th day of Pesach and the 2nd day of Shavuot. It is a difficult minhag to say Yisker because it does not reflect the mood. On the other hand, it was put in to remind us to do tshuva, and that's how things work. But yes, you're right. It's not, and in a sense, now that we have Simchat Torah, so we don't have that issue. And that's what I said at the beginning. It's a little bit weird being in Israel where Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret are mixed in. Okay, I didn't mention that tradition says Din is in Font Hoshana Rabbah. Yeah, I said that's but I'm not, there's no source for that I'm not aware of a source in traditional in Talmudic literature. That's in Kabbalistic literature. There's a notion that the final Hoshana Rabbah is the final day of judgment. I sort of alluded to that last week, where it said on the lunar year, right? Hoshana Rabbah is 11 days after Yom Kippur. So next year Hoshana Rabbah will be on the day Yom Kippur was this year. So maybe that was the connection to Yom Hadin, because we have a lunar and a solar calendar that have to mix. So Hoshana Rabbah and Yom Kippur are sort of, in a regular year, it's 11 days earlier. But there is no source in the Talmud that I'm aware of. And there's for sure no source in the Mishnah. When the Mishnah talks about Yom Hadin, and it mentions 4 Yom Hadin, Hoshana Rabbah is not Sukkot is the last day for rain. So yes, and that's what I said. That's why Hoshana Rabbah. So Hoshana Rabbah is the last day that God is judging us for rain. Rain is the most important thing in the world. Water is the most important thing. So in that sense, Hoshana Rabbah is the last day. But it's this idea, that's a later idea, to daven the Yom Kippur Psukei de Zimra and with the Kittel, and that comes later. But okay, so you can. It's fine to email me privately, but then. If you don't want me to say the question publicly, I won't, but I'm assuming you want me to answer the questions in public. But you can, anyways, but that's
Can I
fine.
ask you something?
Yeah, I just, this other question, somebody texted me. Do you know how most Orthodox shuls are handling hakapas? Yeah, for some, I don't really know. I know a lot of shuls aren't, I would say don't do them. You're asking me, don't do them, or 1 or 2 people do them, because people won't stay 8 feet apart. It's not human nature. Listen, if it was up to me, and maybe, thank God, it's not up to me, but I wrote about this. Those who read my article from a few weeks ago, I would ban shul, period. Like Shimshon Raphael Hirsch said in a totally different context, we should close shuls for 100 years. I would close shuls. It's if the rabbi said don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, can you imagine what would happen today if the rabbis got up and said we're not blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah? Like, we've always blown shofar. The rabbis get up and say we're not going to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah for whatever reason they have. Because some idiot might carry. Right? What Meshuggah is going to carry the shofar Rosh Hashanah? Bring it to the day for. Do you know the riots that would go on? He would throw them out of Judaism. So if the rabbis can ban shofar and lulav, I'm convinced. The shir is officially over. This is now I'm talking my personal editorial comments. So you can feel free to disagree with me. I think the rabbis would, and if it was up to me, I would ban shul, because maybe I don't have an appreciation of how other people need shul for their Judaism. That's now a critique of what I'm saying. I say it because my Judaism is not dependent on shul. Shul is very important, and I usually go to minyan. I try to go to minyan under normal circumstances 3 times a day, twice a day. I usually go. Sometimes I miss, but shul is important. But that's not my Judaism. Judaism is so much more, and then maybe in certain people without shul, that's why the Hasidic community, some of them, not all of them, are doing the way they are. They've already said it now. The Hasidic leaders have come out and said it. Their way of life depends on people coming to shul, coming to a tish. Their way of life will be destroyed, and you have to sacrifice. Everybody sacrifices for something, and it sounds to us very strange, but we, like as somebody said, we don't make this speed limit on the 401 50 kilometers an hour. Less people would die in traffic. Everybody has we sacrifice. So their way of life can't survive without going to shul. So I don't know. To me, that's not the Judaism I practice. But so if you're asking me how shuls are handling it, I think Rav Schechter said that just the rabbis should do hakap. But I don't know. But okay, I talk too much. Anyway, how are your shuls handling it? Yeah.
You're machmer on pekuach nefesh.
Correct. Like Rav Chaim. I come from the Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, the tradition. He would tell people to eat on Yom Kippur, and how can you do that? He says he's not lenient on Yom Kippur. He's machmer on pekuach nefesh. That's
can
right.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
During Chalamoid on Sukkot, we say the Karbonis all the time for 2 different days, even on a Shal Rabbah.
Yeah.
We don't do that on Shmini Atzeres.
I don't know. Shmini Atzeres, that's why we sit in the sukkah. I mean, those who sit in, you're supposed. Whatever. I don't sit in the sukkah, but you're supposed to.
What happened to the question of what day it is?
Yeah, so that's why it's very strange. Right, the Torah leaning. Mind you, in Israel, the Torah reading. The Torah reading on Sukkot is a little boring. Like on Pesach, it's different every day. Even the first 2 days of Sukkot, it's the same from Emor, and then we just read the Korban over and over. So in Chutzar, it's like today was the 6th day of Sukkot, so we read day 5, 6, and 7, and then we read 6 and 7. So on Shmini Atzeres, because Shmini Atzeres is a totally separate holiday.
What happened to the Suffolk?
Yeah, it's not so important. It's rabbinic. So I assuming they had 4 aliyahs. You can ask a better question. Why in Sfiras Omer? why don't we count Sfiras Omer here? Today's the second or the third day because, right? Maybe we start. The commentators ask that question. Why don't we? And the commentators add. So they give two basic answers. One, it's only rabbinic. So in rabbinic, in other words, we have Rosh Hashanah 2 days because it's a biblical. Why isn't Hanukkah 9 days here? Right? Why isn't Purim 2 days here? I mean, it's sort of right because it's a rabbinic holiday. The Speika de Yoma, this doubtful day. The rabbi said we don't want to, make it too. That's only on a biblical level, and it's not even on Yom Kippur. We should have 2 days Yom Kippur. It makes no sense to have 1 day Yom Kippur and 2 days Sukkot. But Yom Kippur is very hard. It's a stringency, the rabbi said. Okay, what's the big deal? An extra day of Yom Tov, of Sukkot. I love Yom Tov. It's nice. 2 days Yom Kippur, that's too hard. And the Ramosha Isserlis quotes, there were people who fast 2 days, said that's wrong. Pikuach Nefesh. Can't fast 2 days on Yom Kippur. There were pious Jews. How can we eat on Yom Kippur? It's Speika de Yoma. So when it's rabbinic, we don't have this. So the Torah reading doesn't matter. So you read 5th day, 6th day, I don't think. But we're not going to do it on Shmini Atzeret. And the second reason they give is when you count, you can't count, like today, counting, I count my money. So is that a $20 bill or a $50 bill? Like, can't say, well, maybe it's $20, maybe it's $25. Like counting by definition has to be exact. So and the whole thing of the day in doubt is all made up. I mean, we don't have any doubt anymore. We keep the custom of the parents, but it's not that it's really a doubt. In other words, what did they do when people were in doubt when it was Shmini Atzeret? Like when they really were in doubt. It's today Hoshana Rabbah or Shmini Atzeret, right? That's what they said in the Sukkah. Like, there was a time when, it's all started because people really didn't know. That's why 2 days young, people did not know when Shmini Atzeret was. So
by the 24th of the month, they would know.
Not always. Not always. The 22nd, yeah, okay, they might, right? Okay.